Hello everyone, welcome back to the class. So for this week, we are going to read another novel by a contemporary Chinese writer Lu Wenfu, which is titled The Gourmet. So we are going to see how in modern Chinese environment, how a contemporary writer is going to write about Chinese food and the people who are obsessed about Chinese food, whom he called the gourmet. And I think that will be very interesting for us to put Lu Wenfu's novel with Zhang Dai's writing side by side and see how the idea about the taste of Chinese food evolved from the pre-modern time to the modern time, and how the historical environment shaped our idea about Chinese food and Chinese taste. So, before we get into the whole story, I think it will be very interesting for us to get an idea of what kind of time period it is and how that overall time period and the political movement and historical situation, all these kind of things influences Lu Wenfu to write this novel. So I just want to list a few time markers for your reference. So for example, 1911 is the date when the Republic of China established, which means China has officially moved from the pre-modern period to the modern period. And 1949 is a date or is a year for People's Republic of China, so the PRC we know nowadays established. And from 1949 to 1978, we call it Mao era. So because this era is China has a chairman Mao as a top leader. And at that time, we encountered this social revolution from 1950s to 1970s, and also include a series of different kinds of political movements such as land reform and the 3 antis and 5 antis campaign, anti-corruption, anti-waste, anti-bureaucracy, blah, 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 all these. And then we encounter this very important political event, which is called Great Leap Forward, which kind of greatly influences Lu Wenfu's idea about food and about who can be called a gourmet, especially in this novel. And then when we enter 1966 to 1976, it is the Cultural Revolution. You may have heard of that. So basically, this time period from 1949 to 1976 are all kinds of political movements. People are being pretty radical about a lot of things and kind of craving for reform and being a different China from the pre-modern one. So a lot of things, very crazy things and very ridiculous things also happened during this period. You can just imagine it as a very chaotic time of the modern China. And our novel, The Gourmet, written by Lu Wenfu, is one of the very good representation of how people actually living in that period will view this world and view their own lives. And then we call it post-Mao era, which is from 1978 to now. And that is, if you heard of that, the term of opening and reform. So China is getting more and more open and getting in contact with other parts of the world and became the China we know now. But our novel is situated in a little bit earlier time period and a little bit goes into the modern, in the contemporary period. So it's very interesting to see how that change happened. So while China was going through this kind of great changes in every perspective of the society, the world too is going through a time change, a periodical change from the World War II to the Cold War and then to the contemporary time. So it's very interesting to have that pictured in your mind when reading this novel. Now let's turn to the writer Lu Wenfu. So he lived from 1927 to 2005. And he was born in Taixing, Jiangsu, but most of his work is located in the specific city Suzhou. Suzhou is not very far away from where Zhang Dai lived, which is in Hangzhou, so only 3 hours if you take by train in nowadays situation. So you can see actually where Lu Wenfu write all these stories is very close to where Zhang Dai write about his experience about the food and about a lot of cultural events. And he is a journalist, magazine editor, president of the Jiangsu Writer Association, vice president of the Chinese Writers Association. And you can consider him a very successful writer and write a lot of the novels, essays, and memoir. A little bit about his own experience. So Lu Wenfu at age of 6 went to an old style school, which is you can consider the similar education Zhang Dai once received at his age. But at 1945, he went to live with relatives and attended Suzhou High School, later went to Hangzhou University to study Marxism, and later become a journalist and a novelist. So you can consider like after 1945, he began to receive the modern education, very much similar to what we are receiving nowadays. So you can consider him as a combination of the old style education and the new style, the modern style education. So I'll consider him as one of the most important figures to connect the pre-modern China with the modern China. But he himself also has a very traumatic experience during the period I just presented to you, that pretty chaotic period of China. So he was denounced as a rightist during the Great Leap Forward and denounced once again in the Cultural Revolution and was sent to the fields for re-education through labor until 1976. And until 1978, he was able to return to Suzhou at the age of 50 and later became an editor of the Suzhou magazine. And the one fun fact is that after publishing this specific novel, The Gourmet, he actually opened a restaurant called the Old Suzhou Gourmet House. So considering this old picture, I think this is Lu Wenfu. And can you tell what they are eating? The crabs, right? I think it is the exact crab Zhang Dai was describing in his own writing. So from a lot of perspective, we can say Lu Wenfu and Zhang Dai shares a lot of interest, and they can relate to each other's interest in a lot of perspectives. And also, Lu Wenfu has a huge obsession. If we are using the word obsession from the Zhang Dai section, Lu Wenfu himself also has a deep obsession about food. He not only write about it, actually eat it, but even more goes forward to have a restaurant. So that kind of deep love is very much prominent in his own life experience and writing. Now let's turn to the novel The Gourmet. So this novel is written in 1983. And the time span the novel covers begins from during the Civil War, so during the 1945 to 1949, that Civil War between the two parties in China. And the story ends after the end of the Cultural Revolution, so after 1978. So you can see there's a huge span of time in this novel. And it's very interesting to pay attention to the time and how at different times the characters in the novel will think things differently and will think about food differently. There are two main characters. So the first is the narrator I, or actually the name is Gao Xiaoting. Because this novel uses a first-person perspective, so we always see I have something, I did something. That is the narrator. And this specific narrator is supposedly from a low-class civilian, and he later joined the Communist Party and later becomes the administrator of a famous restaurant and went through all the political movements and the Cultural Revolution, and also has a similar, I would say, more or less similar traumatic experience like the writer Lu Wenfu himself. And the other main character is Zhu Ziye, who is supposed to be a capitalist or a landlord because he owns a lot of houses for rent at that time. That's why he doesn't need to work, but he's still very rich. And his expertise is in eating. He has a very specific taste in eating and is very picky about what to eat. I think it's very interesting because the two main characters, Gao Xiaoting and Zhu Ziye, are from two very different social classes. So their life experience and life expectations are totally different. We can see a very interesting dynamic between the two. And while reading the novel, I think you can pay attention to how the social class constructed their idea about life and how the differences of their attitude towards life is shaped by their family background and by the political movement going on at that time. So a little bit more about something I would like you to pay attention to while reading this novel. So first is a description about political affairs. You'll see a lot of terms like capitalist, the movement to stamp out prostitution and opium, Comrade Gao, revolution, Cultural Revolution, Soviet Union, socialism, Great Leap Forward, all these. All these kind of terms are very historically correct. We may not use them anymore in contemporary Chinese, but at that time, those are the top hot words everybody was speaking. And that totally give us the feeling of getting back in time and getting back to that chaotic time period. And also, please pay attention to the ironic narrative tone. I say it's ironic, but you can decide it for yourself if you find this novel is being ironic. And if so, what are they ironic about? What does it ironic about? To whom? Is that to everyone? Or to specifically something? Or to everything? Also, because it is a novel, we should always keep in mind from whose perspective we get to know the story, who is the narrator, and from which perspective does he telling the story, and are we limited to some certain perspective? Is there any other detail, any other perspective the narrator didn't show us? And one more thing is about eating, its connection to the past and its modern twist. So I would like you to ask you why eating in particular has the power to showcase the class differentiations, political changes, and ground historical narrative. Why eating? Why food? Why food? That specific daily thing, that so mundane the thing, the so trivial event in everyday life, why it is so important when describing social classes or historical narratives. And also, besides pay attention to the two main characters I just introduced, the capitalist Zhu Ziye and the working class Gao Xiaoting, I think you can also pay some attention to the narrative function of other characters, like my mother, so Gao Xiaoting's mother, R2 or Kong Bixia or Bao Kunnian or Yang Zhongbao, how these supporting characters contributed to the whole narrative, and why the writer incorporated these very vivid and interesting characters into the novel. Okay. By the way, I put these pictures here. That is because this is some of the most representative food in Suzhou, and perhaps that is a food Gao Xiaoting once doesn't like, but Zhu Zi is craving for and obsessed with. So this is the noodle, the soup noodle with shrimps and other meat. And this is a fried / steamed bun with meat inside, I think it was pork inside of it. And this is a very famous dish called 松鼠桂鱼. So literally translated as squirrel fish. So whenever you went to the Chinese restaurant and see on the menu there's squirrel fish, it is not made from squirrel. It's just a fish specifically cut in this shape and fried it and makes it supposed to looks like a squirrel's tail. So you can see all these kind of meat is like a flower blossom and like a squirrel's tail. Okay, so these are very mouth-watering pictures, and I hope you like it. Okay, so that's my introduction to the novel The Gourmet. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a comment down below, and see you on Wednesday. Okay, bye!